खण्डना भव बन्धन जग वन्दन वन्दितो जननर रूपधर निरञ्जन नर रूपधर निर्गुण मोचन अगदूषण जगद्भूषण चिद्घन कायज्ञाना जन विमल नयन ज्ञानाञ्जन विमल नयन वीक्षणे मोहजा भास्वर भाव सागर चिर उन्माद प्रेम पाथाय भक्ता जनयुग लचरण भक्ता जनयुग लचरण तारण भव द्रीभीत युग ईश्वर जगदीश्वर योग सहाय निरोधन समाहित मन निरोधन समाहित मन निरखितव कृपा भञ्जन दुःख गञ्जन करुणाघन कर्म कठोर प्राणार्पण गततारण प्राणार्पण जगततारण कीर्तन कली वंचन काम कांचन अति निंदित इंद्रिय राय त्यागी ईश्वर हे नरवर त्यागीश्वर हे नरवर देह पदे अनुराग निर्भय गत संशय दृढ निश्चय मानस निष्कारण भक्त शरण निष्कारण भक्त शरण त्याजी जाती कुलमा संपद कव श्रीपद भव गोष्पद वारिय थाय प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुख संपद तव श्रीपद भव पुष्पद वारि थाय प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुख जाय नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्य मना हित नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्य मना दित मनोवचनैकाधा प्रभु मनोवचनैकाधा ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वल रुदिकं दर ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वल हृदि कंदर तुमि तम भंजन प्रभु तुमि तम भंजन नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनादित नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनादित मनोवचनैकाधार प्रभु मनोवचनैकाधार ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वल हृदि कंदर ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वल हृदि कंदर तुमि तम भंजन प्रभु तुमि तम भंजन धे 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 रंग रंग भंगवा जे अंग संग मृदंग धे 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 रंग रंग भंग वाजे अंग संग मृदंग गायचे छंद भगत वृंद आरती तोमा गायचे छंद भगत वृंद आरती तोमा जय जय आरती तोमा हर हर आरती तोमा शिव शिव आरती तोमा खंडन भव बंधन जगवंदन वंदितो जय श्री गुरु महाराज जी की जय। ओम ह्रीं ह्रीतं त्वं चलो गुणजीत गुणेढ्या नक्तं दिवं सकरुणं तव पाद पद्मं मोहं कषं बहुकृतं न भजे यतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीन बन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छं जलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदमे न च भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीन बन्धो तेजस्त तरन्ति तरसा त्वयि तृप्त तृष्णा रागे कृते हृतपथे त्वयि राम कृष्णे मर्त्यामृतं तव पदं मरणोन्मिनाशम् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारी शान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नाम नाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। सर्वमंगल मांगल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थ साधिके शरण्ये त्र्यंबके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टि स्थिति विनाशानां शक्ति भूते सनातनी गुणाश्रये गुणमयी Namostute Sharanagata Dinartha Paritrana Parayane Sarva Shakti Hare Devi Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute. जय महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
Hello, hello.
Namah Shri Atirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swami Tapaharine. So last time we pointed out some of the marked similarities between two of these non-dual schools of thought, namely Advaita Vedanta on the one hand and Madhyamaka Buddhism on the other. Let's return, because this is really a theme that is being explored here, at least as an aside, in this lecture, Vivekananda, Absolute and the Manifestation. So let's carry on, and it will be clear that we are returning to this theme again and again. Materialism prevails in Europe today. You may pray for the salvation of the modern skeptics, but they do not yield. They want reason. The salvation of Europe depends on a rationalistic religion, and Advaita, the non-duality, the oneness, the idea of the impersonal God, is the only religion that can have any hold on any intellectual people. Mark this, that the hallmark is clear rational thought, not obscurantism, not emotionalism, but essentially developing the faculty of reason, clear reason, to cut through various obscurations that are there, mostly in terms of our emotional prejudices and biases. And if that be, see, the point is that people have different constitutions, different mental constitutions. And if the overwhelming bias be towards reason, this is a relatively later evolute in the human psychosocial evolutionary scheme, but provided reason guided by an overarching desire for truth above everything else, so long as this is the dominant theme of one's life, the dominant aspiration in one's heart, then the idea of impersonality, a rational goal, becomes automatic, becomes reasonable. It does not depend really on what one's academic background is, really, but it is a certain constitution, something in us that impels, it's something much more basic. The academic background, the training can probably help us in cultivating this rationalistic streak, but it's a more fundamental thing. Is the mind oriented towards truth as a highest value? And if that be the case, if the mind seeks truth above everything else, then the instrument to get at that truth is reason, not emotions. Emotions become something that becomes guided by reason. It does not mean it becomes dry, that's another misconception. But the desire, the refined emotional faculty is driven by this highest value called truth. If that be the case, then the faculty that develops is this inward directed analytical intellect. And he says, therefore, the idea of non-duality, oneness, the idea of the impersonal ideal, the impersonal God, is the only religion that can have any hold on any intellectual people. This was the rational aspect of it. And the very next sentence says that, look, this is not just something that is dry reason, but it also gets to the foundation of what constitutes morality. And so he says, it comes whenever religion seems to disappear and irreligion seems to prevail. And that is why it has taken ground in Europe and America. The worst kind of irreligion, as he describes it here, is a bunch of lower or lesser human passions and craving trying to cover itself up by the name of religion. Or in language that is more conducive to Sanskrit, adharma passing itself off as dharma. Essentially, a person trying to cover his or her self-seeking under the name of religion. And so, what happens is that people who see it and whose moral and rational sensibility is affected, is wounded, is hurt by these manifest acts of dishonesty, then polish their rational faculty a little more so that it can cut through this dishonesty, cut through the fraud, cut through the lies, and expose the lies for what they are. Personal cravings, very selfish personal wishes, maybe for power, maybe for fame, maybe for wealth, maybe for whatever else, trying to pass itself off under a religious garb is the height of dishonesty, because these are people who misuse the core ethos of any religion at its deepest point. For instance, over history, you'll see this unholy nexus between organized religion and people in political power. The core religious persuasion, the core religious pursuit, quest, is something that is universal. It is something that is available to all human beings by dint of their belonging to this species and having a certain mental development. It does not depend on what society one is born into. The core aspiration is all that counts. But people who use this nexus between politics and organized religion try to fire up in their adherents a hatred for the other, an anger for the other, a fear of the other. These three passions, particularly anger, hatred, fear, these are animal passions and should be recognized as such. They were necessary for evolution, as I have said this here before several times, but has nothing whatsoever to do with the core quest, which is for the spirit of man. It has nothing to do with this higher aspiration for either altruism or truth. And so when people try to pass one thing off as its opposite, this impersonal rationality comes to the fore and cuts through those obscurations, those obscurantisms, and exposes the core for the rot at the core of these statements. This is the background from which the statement of Vivekananda comes. It comes whenever religion seems to disappear and irreligion seems to prevail, and I should add, masquerading as religion. And that is why it has taken ground in Europe and America. Why? You should remember, this is the end of the 19th century, where what happened? Essentially, the waves of rationality were sweeping over what we call the New World, namely Europe and particularly the United States. What happened? The medieval religious constructs were found wanting. The nexus between the king and the royal and the religion that was patronized by them, this was breaking up. The spirit of democracy was coming in. What is democracy? Not as a political system, but as a system of thought. It's based on this basic idea that human beings have the same rights. That between one human being and another, there isn't any fundamental difference. Recognition of this is what is implemented by what we call democracy today. But at its core, there is this idea that human beings are the same in spirit, essentially. We cannot differentiate between one and the other on the basis of adventitious adjuncts. So let's go on, because at the next stage, he will explain further, at the next paragraph, he will explain further this movement towards impersonality, towards de-anthropomorphization. I would say one thing more in connection with this philosophy. This philosophy means Advaita Vedanta. In the old Upanishads, we find sublime poetry. Their authors were poets. Plato says, inspiration comes to people through poetry, and it seems as if these ancient rishis, seers of truth, were raised above humanity to show these truths through poetry. They never preached, nor philosophized, nor wrote. Mark, the way we usually communicate, the things that we usually attribute to organized religion, none of them, these characteristics are there. Never preached, nor did they form any school of philosophy, because they were not interested in creating a team of people around themselves. Nor philosophized, nor wrote. What then did they do? Music came out of their hearts. In Buddha, we had the great universal heart and infinite patience, making religion practical and bringing it to everyone's door. Universality, that is being stressed here. In Shankaracharya, we saw tremendous intellectual power throwing the scorching light of reason upon everything. See these two great aspects of the highest aspects of evolution. On the one hand, altruism, that's exactly what we call in popular parlance the large heart. And on the other, this capacity to analyze, reason. And these two things happening together. That's what he is going towards. We want today that bright sun of intellectuality joined with the heart of Buddha, the wonderful infinite heart of love and mercy. This union will give us the highest philosophy. This union, the union of altruism on the one hand and clear reason on the other. Knowledge and love in their purest forms. Science and religion will meet and shake hands. Poetry and philosophy will become friends. This will be the religion of the future. And if we can work it out, we may be sure that it will be for all times and peoples. Usually, we think of the scientific temperament and the religious temperament as antithetical to each other. There are deep sociological reasons. I would not say philosophical reasons, but deep sociological reasons. And most of it is based on misunderstanding of the essence of the other discipline. What is the scientific quest, really? At the core, the scientific quest is aimed at looking at the world and discovering the truth underlying this world, assuming most of the time space-time causation as a common underlying framework. And the knowledge that is gained, the universal principles that are gained out of that scientific quest are to be made available to all human beings. Very simple. We derive the benefits of science on a day-to-day basis in a way that we take these things for granted. Just look at us in this particular moment. There are all this hall is well lighted. How did these lights come to be? Comes from electricity. The harnessing of electricity for human welfare. Somebody had to discover that principle. A scientist discovered this principle in the 19th century. And slowly over time, now today, after a gap of more than 100 years, it is available on everybody's doorstep, in everybody's house. On the one hand, there is this quest to get at the basic guiding principle, that of electricity, that guides a whole bunch of natural phenomena. Step one, gaining that knowledge. Second, using the knowledge gained to harness the power in this for the benefit of a larger group of individuals. The core spirit of science is precisely this. One, the quest for truth. Second, its benefits being made available to all. But we regard this as a very impersonal pursuit. A person who brings a huge amount of emotional prejudice, emotional baggage, will not be able to do correct science, basically because he or she will try to get the results according to what one likes or dislikes, not according to what is objectively true. So this impersonal pursuit today in day-to-day society is exactly what is science as a day-to-day pursuit. And along with it, its universal applicability. It does not care whether it is being used by a person with skin color A or skin color B. Does not matter whether that person belongs to religion such and such or religion such and such. It is here that this impersonality and its mirror image universality come to the fore. This is the real spirit of science. Now, take religion. By the way, in this science, the starting point was this world around us. Take that as the starting data and then excavate, penetrate into that appearance to get at what principle underlies it. The core of religion, the general process, is rather similar except for the starting point. What is the starting point there? The starting point there is the individual subject. What I regard as me and my relationship with the world. So its focus is on the subjective world rather than the objective world. But once you take that as the starting point, the rest of the process is very similar. One is trying to get at what are the universal principles behind one's subjective experience. I see these things, I smell these things, I taste these things. And one asks oneself, what does it mean to say that I taste these things or smell these things or see these things? What is at the basis of my subjective experience? Prashnopanishad, Kene Shitam Patati Preshitam Manaha. These are the questions that start off these great Upanishads. Starts off with a question. There's a core question which unifies this enquiry. A core question in the Prashnopanishad is exactly this. Impelled by what do the eyes work? Impelled by what do the ears hear? Again, a question starting with a subjective phenomenon which is pretty universal. All human beings see through their eyes, hear through their ears. And what the one is asking is, well, there is this particular human activity, this human process of gaining knowledge. What is the universal principle behind it? This is the core quest. Again, universal, impersonal. It is here that in the faculty, in the quality of the mind, that a synthesis between these two things, which are traditionally regarded as antagonistic, it is here that this synthesis may be sought. In the quality of mind that seeks truth above everything else and adopts as a method enquiry. Okay. I have mentioned as an aside that there are reasons and reasons enough for the antagonism, and it's essentially the initial antagonism is when religious dogma prevented, thwarted enquiry. There would be a certain dogma believed in by a group of people subscribing mostly to an organized religion, and once one of those premises was challenged by a process of scientific enquiry, then there's a certain feeling of threat, a feeling of insecurity. Why? Because that aspect has not been thoroughly investigated, but has formed a theology, formed a doctrine. And enquiry, asking of pointed questions, threatens that dogma, threatens that prejudice, and the way human beings respond to such threats is by anger, hatred, fear. At the core of it is this fear. Which is why Vivekananda went on insisting that what the Upanishads teach us is abhi, fearlessness. Fearlessness not just in terms of fear of material powers, but fearlessness can only come when one has confidence in the truth. Not in one's personal prejudices, in one's personal opinion. If the enquiry into truth challenges that, challenges a personal conviction and asks questions of it, then the response to that is one of two things. Either, yes, I was wrong and there is this extra bit of clarity that has been added by this. Or, no, that assertion is wrong because of such and such reason. It's a calm, level-headed discussion. No place for passion there. On the other hand, the earlier thing, power was used to throttle such enquiry. Hence a certain source of antagonism. On the other hand, once after the 15th or 16th century, there was a change in the culture, the Renaissance culture, particularly in Europe. Reason became the deity to be worshipped. And so, this flash of intelligence which gives us access to deeper knowledge, this subjective way of gaining knowledge was discarded as a paradigm for gaining knowledge altogether. Part of it was definitely a reaction to the organized religious churches. But people, by and large, did not have the patience or the penetration to inspect carefully what it was that was lying at the core of these belief systems. You may throw away the husk, but throwing away the husk should not entail throwing away the kernel of truths in them. It's only over the last few decades that again, even in the scientific world, this study of consciousness as a universal subjective phenomenon has come up all over again, but now from a very different angle, studying it from the point of view of reason. Again, it really echoes this, that this non-duality, oneness, the idea of the impersonal God is the only religion that can have any hold on any intellectual people. Not theology, not dogmatism, not obscurantism. This is the one way that will prove acceptable to modern science, for it has almost come to it. When the scientific teacher asserts that all things are the manifestation of one force, does it not remind you of the God of whom you hear in the Upanishads? As the one fire entering into the universe expresses itself in various forms, even so that one soul is expressing itself in every soul and yet is infinitely more besides. This is from the Kathopanishad. Agner yathaikam bhuvanam pravishta. As the one fire entering into the universe, rupam rupam pratirupam babhuva. What is the translation? Expresses itself in various forms. Ekas tatha sarva bhutantaratma rupam rupam pratirupo bahishcha. Even so that one soul is expressing itself in every soul and yet is infinitely more besides. See here, again, these great lines from the Upanishads, they in some sense, they outline the discovery that these great investigators made in the subjective world, the universal aspect of human subjective experience, not the objective world, but the universal aspect of subjective human experience. We are coming towards the end of today's thing, but I would like to stress one other thing which we've talked about here. Again, from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it says something like this. Yada sarvam atmai vabhut. Yada sarvam atma eva abhut. Where all has become unified in one's consciousness. Tat kenakam pashyet, kenakam shinuyat, kenakam jigret, kenakam manvita. Then by what will one see another? Then by what will one taste another? Then by what will one think of another? Then by what will one mentate on another? Yeah? Tat kenakam pashyet, kenakam shinuyat. Then by what will one hear another? Kenakam pashyet, kenakam shinuyat, kenakam jigret, kenakam manvita. Manvita means to think of another. Kenakam vijaniyat. By what will one know another? This instrument through which we perceive duality, namely this conditioned mind, creating duality, creating division between me and the other. This duality, I am one thing, the world is another. I am the center of the universe and the world is supposed to revolve around me in an extreme form. This otherness, this sense of duality is supposed to be removed by this process of inquiry. Hence, what does one arrive at? And this is what was expressed in this Brihadaranyaka through this passage. Yada sarvam atma eva abhut. When the mind is held at the point from which knowledge in its most universal form springs forth. Which point are we talking about? The deepest point in our psyche. When we see something and our mind is not attached to our eyes, when we do not have attention exerted on what we are seeing, then the eyes will see, but the mind will not register that as a piece of knowledge. So the principle of knowledge is more fundamental. That's what is being stressed here. Similarly, there are all these avenues, the sense of touch through our skin, the sense of hearing through our ears, the sense of tasting in our tongue, the sense of smelling in our nose. But all these are fragmented pieces of knowledge. Here, what one is going towards is the question which asks, what is this knowledge in itself? What is the generalized principle of knowledge whose particular aspects are visual knowledge, auditory knowledge, tactile knowledge, and so on? Essentially, trying to get at a universal piece of knowledge, and this is exactly this universal principle of knowledge is what is referred to as consciousness in today's parlance. It used to be called, or it is called in Sanskrit, the Chit. Chit or Chaitanya. Chit is the knowledge aspect of all of reality, and Chaitanya is what refers to consciousness. This quest was there at that time from this large universal point of view, and it is again there today in the scientific world. I've mentioned this hard problem of consciousness by this philosopher David Chalmers. It's essentially the mind-body problem, but it's a problem that scientists are waking up to today. Not religious people, but scientists, active practicing scientists. It has a very concrete form in perhaps the most materialistic basis of human perceptions, namely neuroscience. There, the problem takes this form. It's called the binding problem there. What's the problem? Say, for example, I'm seeing this camera in front of me. There is a dedicated set of neurons which record the shape of the camera. There is another dedicated set of neurons which encode what the color is. Then another set of neurons decide whether this is moving or stationary. But at the same time, when I look at it, I do not look through these three features differently. What is it in the human nervous system that binds these three pieces of data and says, oh, I am seeing one thing, it's called a camera. It has this shape, it has this shape. There's this one thing which has this shape, which has this color, which at the moment is stationary. This integration of various aspects of the camera in our consciousness basically brings to mind this one idea: this is a camera in front of me. What is the faculty? One understands which neurons lie at the basis of recognizing shape, which neurons lie at the basis of recognizing color. But what is it that binds these two things together to say it's the one thing? There's this fan that's moving, it's got this color that's white, it's got light reflecting off it, and so on. There are various systems in our brain that register these different aspects. What is being investigated today is what is it? What is the part of our nervous system that binds these together and says, oh, I am seeing a fan. It is moving. This one thing, the fan, is moving. And on its blades, the light is reflecting off. It is color white, etc., etc. This simple scientific problem is a placeholder for this much deeper scientific problem of what is it that contributes to unity of subjective experience. Now generalize this one thing at this moment to our entire life experience. I was a young person, now I have grown old, now my beard has turned grey, etc., 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 etc. There's this whole collection of memories. But what is it in us that contributes the unity of the subject in and through all these experiences? This is the more difficult part of that same neuroscientific problem, the binding problem. These are questions that are being addressed today. Not in terms of race, not in terms of theology, not in terms of organized religion, not in terms of one group that one belongs to, but something that is universal in human experience and hence impersonal. This impersonal analytic quest on the one hand and the quest for universality on the other are obverse and reverse of the same kind of mental enquiry, same kind of eagerness for truth, same kind of quest that underlies finally on the one hand truth, which places truth above everything else on the one hand, and second, the criterion for that it uses is its universality, independent of the particular subject that is experiencing it. This is how modern, how relevant the study of the Upanishads, or equivalently, this impersonal quest manifests itself again in Madhyamaka Buddhism, as we've been saying here. Again, yeah? Let me just finish this paragraph and we'll come back to it. Do you not see whither science is tending? The Hindu nation proceeded through the study of the mind, through metaphysics and logic. The European nations start from external nature and now they too are coming to the same results. We find that searching through the mind, we at last come to that oneness, that universal one, the internal soul of everything, the essence and reality of everything, the ever free, the ever blissful, the ever existing. Through material science, we come to the same oneness. Science today is telling us that all things are but the manifestation of one energy, which is the sum total of everything which exists, and the trend of humanity is towards freedom and not towards bondage. Why should men be moral? Because through morality is the path towards freedom, and immorality leads to bondage. We'll return to this 2 weeks down the line. Next week I will not be here. But in this one paragraph, there's great depth. He has put 3 quests simultaneously together in this one paragraph. the enquiry from the point of view of Advaita Vedanta, stressing the rational aspects. The same time, the Buddhist aspect of universality, where these enquiries should be available to all human beings, no hierarchy. And the third point is the spirit of scientific enquiry. This is at the end of the 19th century, and today, after more than 100 years, that spirit is just as alive and thriving. These three quests are unified in this one paragraph. We'll return to this 2 weeks down the line. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.